There's something unusual about people who keep attracting the same type of toxic relationships over and over. Maybe it's the way they can sense emotional needs in others before anyone else notices. Maybe it's how they interpret conflict as something to solve rather than avoid. Or maybe it's that specific combination of empathy and endurance that seems almost hardwired into how they connect. Because attracting toxic people isn't about weakness or poor judgment. It's about carrying a psychological trait that researchers are only now connecting to early emotional conditioning. And trust me, by the end of this video, you're going to see why the very qualities making you vulnerable are also the ones that make you capable of the deepest connections once you understand how they work. Let's start with something most people never consider about the way empathetic people process other people's emotions. Watch how these individuals behave in early interactions, and a pattern begins to reveal itself. People who attract toxic personalities don't rush into conversations loudly or assertively. They tend to observe first, to understand the emotional dynamic, before taking up any space. This makes them appear safe, approachable, and easy to confide in. Toxic individuals notice this quickly. These are the people who listen longer than most, who allow others to speak without interruption, who don't immediately challenge inconsistencies or red flags. Not because they are naive, but because they are interpretive processors. They gather emotional information before forming a conclusion. In groups, they often play the stabilizer. They diffuse tension. They pick up on discomfort. They adjust themselves to maintain balance. This skill makes them socially valuable, but it also makes them vulnerable to those who want a one-sided dynamic. There's another pattern too. People who attract toxicity often have a high tolerance for emotional discomfort. They don't shut down quickly. They don't withdraw at the first sign of conflict. Instead, they try to understand the underlying cause. They give second chances, then third chances, because they assume behavior comes from pain, not malice. Toxic people exploit this reflex. What looks like patience is actually emotional endurance. What looks like forgiveness is actually pattern analysis. What looks like acceptance is actually hope that things can improve. This dynamic becomes even more pronounced in relationships. When a toxic individual begins testing boundaries with dismissive comments, shifting expectations, emotional inconsistency, the person on the receiving end doesn't immediately respond with rejection. They respond with evaluation. What made them act this way? Are they stressed? Is this behavior temporary? This empathetic reasoning creates a slow erosion. Small violations go unaddressed. Responsibilities shift subtly. The emotional load gets redistributed, all while the person absorbing it tells themselves they're simply being understanding. And because toxic individuals confuse understanding with permission, this small imbalance grows until it becomes the entire structure of the relationship. None of this stems from weakness. It stems from an internal belief that relationships improve through effort, not confrontation. A belief that becomes dangerous only when interacting with people who manipulate effort. Here is the twist most people never see. People who attract toxic individuals share one core psychological mechanism. They were conditioned to earn emotional safety instead of expect it. This is the root pattern. It often begins in early environments where love, approval, or stability felt inconsistent. Not necessarily traumatic, sometimes just unpredictable. In these situations, a child learns to scan moods, to anticipate reactions, to adjust their behavior, to maintain harmony. This creates adaptive emotional intelligence. But it comes with a lifelong side effect. They interpret emotional responsibility as something they must carry. So in adulthood, when someone enters their life with volatile moods, shifting expectations, or manipulative tendencies, their brain doesn't register danger. It registers familiarity. Their instinct is not, this is toxic. Their instinct is, I can manage this. And toxic individuals, consciously or not, recognize people who manage. The second part of the twist is even more unexpected. People who attract toxic personalities often project generosity onto others before it's earned. They assume good intentions. They extend empathy preemptively. They fill in emotional gaps automatically, believing everyone values connection the same way. This creates an identity mismatch. They relate through understanding, Toxic people relate through extraction. Once you understand this dynamic, everything becomes clearer. What looks like people-pleasing is actually adaptive safety behavior. What looks like bad boundaries is actually emotional pattern repetition. What looks like attraction to toxic people is actually tolerance for emotional unpredictability. And here is the emotional validation that matters. People who attract toxic individuals don't do it because they're weak. They do it because their nervous system learned to survive by stabilizing others. They were trained to absorb tension rather than react to it. They were conditioned to soothe instead of protect. This form of emotional intelligence becomes a strength only after the pattern is recognized. Before that, it becomes a doorway toxic individuals walk through easily, not because the person is vulnerable, but because they are capable. The solution to the pattern isn't becoming less caring, it's learning the difference between care and emotional labor. Once this core mechanism is understood, the entire pattern sharpens into focus. People who attract toxicity often carry a psychological trait known as selective accountability. They hold themselves responsible for the emotional tone of every relationship they're in. If there's conflict, they self-correct. If someone is hurt, they apologize first. If something feels off, they assume they misread something. If someone pulls away, they increase effort. This internal reflex creates a powerful, unintended message. Toxic behavior will not be questioned. It will be managed. And toxic people rely on that silence. But here's the turning point. The very trait that makes them vulnerable, emotional responsibility, also gives them the ability to end the pattern permanently. Because once they recognize the dynamic, they begin to see what others miss. Who drains them versus who supports them. Who uses vulnerability versus who shares it. Who expects emotional labor versus who reciprocates it. Who benefits from their empathy versus who deserves it. The real turning point isn't breaking the bond with a toxic person. It's breaking the internal rule that says I must hold everything together. When that rule collapses, the attraction dissolves. People who once tolerated inconsistent behavior now recognize it instantly. They no longer explain excuses they were never given. They no longer stabilize someone who destabilizes them. They no longer use empathy as a shield. This shift is profound. Toxic people don't lose interest because they're confronted. They lose interest because the dynamic that feeds them disappears. And in that moment, the person who once attracted toxicity becomes selectively unavailable to it, not through force, but through clarity. This clarity is what changes everything. Here is where everything comes together. The people who once attracted toxic personalities begin operating with a new psychological framework, one built on discernment instead of emotional endurance. They start noticing their own patterns first, who they over-explain to, who they give extra chances to, who they justify instinctively, who they feel responsible for without reason. This awareness breaks the cycle not by changing who they are, but by realigning how they use their strengths. Their empathy becomes selective. Their patience becomes intentional. Their emotional intelligence becomes protective, not sacrificial. And here's what shifts. They stop attracting toxic people, not because they've hardened, but because they've stopped offering the emotional labor toxic people require to survive. Their identity shifts from someone who absorbs to someone who chooses. This is how the pattern breaks. They were never drawn to toxic people. Toxic people were drawn to them. But once these individuals begin requiring reciprocity, accountability, and emotional maturity, the gravitational pull disappears. And that's the final insight. People who have been drained by toxic relationships often carry the exact traits that make them extraordinary partners, friends, and leaders. Once those traits are used with intention instead of reflex, this isn't the end of their pattern. It's the beginning of their boundaries.